Caterpillar, the unstoppable force that built highways, powered military missions, and shaped the very backbone of American industry, is pulling out of the United States entirely. This isn't just a business decision. It's an industrial earthquake. Communities across the country are in shock. Workers feel blindsided, even betrayed. And America's global standing in manufacturing just took a serious blow. The question on everyone's mind is, why? Why would a powerhouse like Caterpillar abandon its roots? Is it all just about chasing profits overseas? Or is there something much deeper at play? What will this seismic move mean for American jobs, local economies, and the future of U.S. manufacturing? You deserve to know the truth, because this isn't just about one company. It's about the fate of American industry itself. And once you hear what's really happening, it might just change how you see the future of this country. In some towns across the Midwest, Caterpillar wasn't just a company. It was the reason those towns even existed. Built on steel tracks and forged in generations of sweat and labor, these were places where life revolved around the hum of assembly lines and the pride of building machines that moved the world. Take Peoria, Illinois, for example. Entire families there have built their lives around Caterpillar. One retired machinist still keeps a miniature model of the D70 bulldozer on his mantle, a proud reminder of the days when the town thrived. His daughter now works in the local school cafeteria, where the school budget depends on the taxes paid by the now silent plant. But it's more than just jobs. It's identity. It's culture. The high school football team is called the Bulldozers. Every 4th of July, the parade floats are built on old track frames, decorated in Caterpillar yellow, a color as common in town as the American flag. When Caterpillar leaves, it doesn't just take paychecks with it. It rips out the very soul of these communities. And the ripple effects could last for generations. The machines Caterpillar builds are more than just steel and hydraulics. They're woven into the fabric of the communities they power. In places like Peoria, Illinois, the company's presence has shaped everything from the local economy to the very culture of the town. For decades, the economic footprint of Caterpillar stretched far beyond the factory gates. Thanks to its steady stream of well-paying jobs, the median household income in Peoria has historically hovered around 20% higher than the state average. Local businesses, coffee shops, diners, hardware stores, thrived under the gravitational pull of Caterpillar's payroll. Even the school district's funding was deeply tied to the property taxes collected from the company's sprawling facilities. Life felt stable, predictable, safe. That is, until the rumors started. Long before sunrise, whispers rippled through the town. A press release was coming. No one knew what it would say, but the tension was already thick in the air. Inside the homes of workers and on the floor of the local diner, there was a quiet dread, because everyone knew that when a giant like Caterpillar stirs, it isn't always good news. Behind closed doors, Caterpillar's leadership was feeling the squeeze. The economics of manufacturing had turned into a pressure cooker. Every dime increase in the price of nickel meant millions in added costs for a single bulldozer. And the prices of key materials, steel, copper, diesel, had been rising steadily. On top of that, 2 years of unpredictable tariffs on critical components like imported bearings and hydraulic hoses had sent costs spiraling out of control. Margins were thinning dangerously, and what once looked like a well-oiled global supply chain now seemed like a house of cards. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was grim. Executives pored over charts and forecasts under the banner of a project ominously codenamed Sandstorm, an internal study exploring offshoring options. Ironically, the very tariffs introduced under President Donald Trump, intended to protect American manufacturers, were now pushing one of the country's most iconic industrial giants to consider leaving American soil. The system designed to shield them was now strangling them. And Caterpillar, once a symbol of unshakable American strength, was quietly preparing to shift its weight elsewhere. Shareholders were growing restless. What was once a rock-solid industrial titan now appeared dangerously close to cracking under global pressure. Adding to the urgency, Chinese state-backed manufacturers were flooding international markets with heavy machinery at prices Caterpillar simply couldn't match, sometimes offering similar equipment at nearly half the cost. At the same time, the European Union was preparing to implement new carbon border taxes, a move that would further erode Caterpillar's already fragile pricing power in key export markets. For the company's leadership, the writing was on the wall. Staying in the U.S. might not just be bad business. It could be financial suicide. At 6 a.m., the boardroom was silent except for the rustle of papers and the low hum of tension in the air. A spreadsheet glowed on the conference table, detailing the projected losses if domestic production continued. The numbers were stark, the margins unforgiving. The board took a final vote. The decision was unanimous. As the final hands lowered, the silence that followed felt heavy, like the stillness after a storm, just before the damage is truly understood. The press release was short, just 5 sentences, 218 words, but it was enough to send shockwaves across the nation. Caterpillar was shutting down its U.S. manufacturing operations and moving production abroad. Within seconds, the news wire lit up. On factory floors across America, sirens wailed, an unscheduled assembly call. Phones buzzed. Workers glanced at one another, wide-eyed, unsure of what came next. Some stared at their screens in disbelief. Others looked out at the factory floor they had spent decades building. The stock market reacted instantly. Caterpillar shares surged in pre-market trading, fueled by investor optimism that the move would significantly cut costs and boost profits. But not everyone was cheering. Insurance companies raised premiums on political risk coverage, wary of the growing volatility surrounding companies making drastic relocations. Shares of rival equipment makers also jumped, investors anticipating a shift in customer loyalty. The political fallout came swiftly. President Donald Trump, who had made American manufacturing a central pillar of his presidency, took to the airwaves in a furious televised address. He labeled the move a betrayal of the American worker and vowed to introduce a new jobs charter aimed at penalizing corporations that turned their backs on U.S. labor. Up north, the response was markedly different. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney extended a pragmatic olive branch, openly inviting Caterpillar to consider relocating some of its operations to Canada, where environmental and labor regulations are less stringent and the political climate more stable. In a single morning, Caterpillar went from being the bedrock of American industry to a global case study in the brutal realities of modern capitalism. Inside the factory, the initial shock begins to settle into a heavy, suffocating silence. Workers mill about in stunned disbelief, unsure of what to say or who to turn to. Some quietly reach for their phones, already dialing union reps, desperate for guidance or reassurance. But there are no clear answers. The silence echoing through the assembly bays is louder than any presidential tweet storm or market reaction. The machines are still. The air is thick with the weight of uncertainty. A place once alive with the rhythmic clatter of production now feels hollow, like a ghost of itself. Caterpillar's sudden move isn't just a story about a company. It's a story about lives, about communities that built their identities around the sound of engines and the scent of steel. We've dug deep into how this decision is reshaping entire towns and entire industries. What's happening here is more than a corporate relocation. It's a transformation of the American industrial landscape. If you value thoughtful, in-depth coverage like this, consider hitting that subscribe button and dropping a like. It truly helps us continue telling these important stories. But for many, that's small comfort. Paychecks have become paper cuts. Friday's payout will be the last, and no one even knew to say goodbye on the assembly line. For one third-generation line welder, the news comes not while clocked in, but during something far more personal. He's coaching his son's Little League team when the push notification lights up his phone. Facility closure. Immediate layoff. His heart drops. In that moment, thoughts race. Not about the next play or the game, but about the mortgage, the health insurance, and the college fund he and his wife have been scraping together for their daughter. Suddenly, everything feels fragile. He wipes his hands on his jeans, try to focus on the field as practice winds down, shielding his son from the storm he knows is coming. Back at home, he and his wife sit side by side at the kitchen table, staring at the official layoff notice on his laptop screen. Years of loyalty and service are reduced to a generic message and a cold invitation to join a webinar on how to apply for unemployment. There's no severance, no farewell, just a new reality they're forced to accept. His wife pulls up the family budget, circling the due dates of upcoming bills. Together, they go over the numbers again and again, try to force the math to work. But this isn't just about numbers. It's about dignity, security, the quiet panic that comes when you realize the future you thought was secure has vanished overnight. The savings account, meant for emergencies, looks more fragile than ever before. Within just 48 hours of the announcement, unemployment filings in Caterpillar-dependent towns skyrocket by 38%. Lines begin to form outside local job centers, filled with men and women still wearing their work jackets, unsure of what's next. The atmosphere is a strange mix of shock, bitterness, and urgency. Some people exchange stunned glances. Others vent their frustration aloud. A few are already making plans to move, to chase work in other states where the last remnants of American manufacturing still hold on. At the local diner, once alive with chatter from the factory floor, the mood is somber. Coffee cups sit half full as regulars stare at headlines glowing on their phones. There's no need for small talk. The news has silenced everything. Families that once lived comfortably on stable, union-backed incomes now face an uncertain future. Late into the night, spouses huddle over spreadsheets and bills, calculating just how long the mortgage grace period might stretch. College plans are paused. Dreams are deferred. For some kids, the idea of leaving for school fades, knowing their parents are no longer standing on solid ground. Next door, a family where both parents worked at the same Caterpillar facility takes a double hit. They're now considering selling one of their 2 cars just to stay current on the utilities. Even those who thought they were financially prepared find themselves in uncharted territory. A temporary setback is one thing, but a total collapse of household income? That's a storm no budget plan accounted for. The financial strain quickly turns into a health crisis. With job losses come lapses in health insurance. Community clinics, already stretched thin, brace for an influx of newly uninsured patients. Doctors and nurses, many of whom have cared for these families for decades, begin reviewing files, knowing which patients are likely to skip visits, ration medications, or forego treatments altogether. At the pharmacy, conversations shift. The usual back and forth about dosages is replaced with questions about cash discounts. Some patients whisper about cutting pills in half. Others quietly ask whether it's safe to skip doses. And still, amid the uncertainty, the Union Hall opens its doors. Organizers don't have answers yet, but they provide coffee, sandwiches, and a place to sit. It's a small act of solidarity, but it matters. For now, it's a lifeline, a reminder that even in moments of systemic collapse, people still look out for one another. In Caterpillar towns across America, community becomes the last safety net standing. As union leaders scramble to understand the legal implications of the sudden layoffs, confusion and desperation hang heavy in the air. A few workers talk quietly about the possibility of a class action lawsuit, wondering whether Caterpillar violated any labor laws. But for most, the priority isn't legal retribution, it's survival. How do you make it through the next few weeks without a paycheck? The union president stands before the crowd, calling for solidarity and promising to fight for their rights. But the anxious, weary faces say more than words ever could. No one knows what the future holds, and hope feels harder to muster by the hour. But the damage doesn't end with lost jobs and broken household budgets. What begins as personal financial devastation quickly becomes a civic emergency. Main Street starts to feel the tremors next. Municipal budgets, once stable and bolstered by Caterpillar's massive tax contributions, suddenly become a dangerous exercise in subtraction. A city budget, after all, is just math until the math disappears. In town after town, mayors call emergency council meetings to explore drastic measures. 5% emergency levies, across-the-board cuts, and the elimination of services that once seemed essential. Snowplow routes are shortened. Potholes are left to grow. Without Caterpillar's tax dollars, there simply isn't enough money to keep up with even the most basic infrastructure. Schools are among the first to feel the squeeze. In towns like Peoria, the local elementary school, where many of the laid-off workers' children are enrolled, prepares for major changes. Classrooms are consolidated. Teachers worry about overcrowding, limited supplies, and shrinking budgets for educational programs. Extracurricular activities, already on tight margins, face elimination. Even core academic subjects are threatened. Parents, already reeling from job losses, now fear for their children's future too, not just economically, but academically. In Peoria, the mayor takes to the podium for a televised address. His tone is grim. The city is facing an unprecedented budget shortfall. Police and fire departments are now on the chopping block, facing possible layoffs of their own. Public safety, once taken for granted, is now in jeopardy. Town halls grow tense. Residents pack the rooms, demanding answers, some with anger, others with heartbreak. A few come with suggestions, clinging to the hope that something can be salvaged. But the numbers don't lie. Without Caterpillar's payroll and property taxes, the very systems that hold these communities together, education, emergency services, road repair are at risk of falling apart. What was once the hum of a prosperous factory town is now replaced by the uneasy silence of a community trying to survive the aftermath of corporate abandonment. And the question remains, what happens to a town when its heartbeat stops? The once thriving sports programs that unified communities on Friday nights are now on the chopping block. Coaches who were once mentors and local heroes find themselves having to break the news to their teams. No new jerseys, fewer games, maybe no season at all. In the music wing, the band director speaks quietly to a room full of hopeful students, explaining that some instruments may have to be returned, shelved, or even sold off. It's not just budget cuts, it's dreams deferred, passions paused. Across town at the public library, the mood is equally heavy. Staff members prepare for a round of painful budget reductions, knowing that fewer open hours and possible branch closures are now real possibilities. The head librarian, a fixture in the community, gently wraps rare books in archival paper, whispering to a colleague, "This isn't just about money. This is about preserving knowledge, our collective memory." Patrons gather in small clusters, reminiscing about story time with their children, summer reading programs, and the quiet comfort of a corner seat during finals week. For many, the library has been more than a building. It's been a lifeline. The economic ripple stretches beyond schools and libraries, pulling local businesses into the undertow. The hardware store that once buzzed with foot traffic from Caterpillar workers after their shifts now sits quiet. Shelves are stocked, but no one's buying. The owner, a second-generation business owner, glances at the lights overhead, calculating how many more weeks he can afford to keep them on. Just down the street, the diner that once bustled with blue-collar workers grabbing early breakfasts or late dinners now hosts only a few retirees nursing cups of coffee and trading stories of better times. Property tax revenues collapse in lockstep with Caterpillar's departure. The sprawling manufacturing facilities that once served as economic engines now loom empty, monuments to what was. Schools begin shuttering classrooms. Fire stations suspend overtime and begin rotating staff. And once again, the library, the soul of so many small towns, starts packing away its books. The emotional toll is clear. A city council member who once championed economic revitalization now privately admits doubt about the town's future. Behind closed doors, librarians and educators share a quiet grief, lamenting not just the loss of funding, but the erosion of public knowledge, community pride, and collective hope. Meanwhile, the reverberations reach Washington. Capitol Hill is awash in blame. Lawmakers from the Midwest, stunned by the collapse of a company that once symbolized American industrial might, lash out in committee hearings. Senators confront the Commerce Secretary, their voices sharp, accusing the administration's trade policies and tariff decisions of driving Caterpillar overseas. The Secretary, under fire, defends the broader economic strategy, insisting that the intention was to protect American manufacturing, not gut it. But to the people in Peoria and towns just like it, those arguments feel hollow. Because in their world, it's not about policy. It's about empty lunchboxes, shuttered schools, silent factories, and a future rewritten without their consent. The administration continues to defend its economic strategy, insisting that the short-term pain will eventually give way to long-term gain. But that promise feels increasingly hollow to communities left behind. On Capitol Hill, frustration mounts. The Populist Caucus, spanning both sides of the political spectrum, threatens to block future trade legislation unless it includes stronger worker protections. They argue that current policies, meant to bolster American manufacturing, have instead weakened it by failing to anticipate how global supply chains would react. As the political firestorm grows, the media jumps in with both feet. Cable news hosts and opinion panels debate the collapse, each offering their own scapegoats. Some pundits point to globalization, claiming that American companies simply can't compete with nations where wages are a fraction of the cost. Others take aim at unions, arguing that generous pensions and high labor costs made Caterpillar's U.S. plants unsustainable. And then there are those who focus squarely on the corporation itself, accusing Caterpillar's leadership of abandoning American workers in pursuit of higher stock prices and larger executive bonuses. Political action committees begin releasing donor maps that show just how deeply intertwined heavy industry is with both political parties. Caterpillar's campaign contributions are dissected, questioned, and weaponized. Public polling shows a nation increasingly split, torn between the ideals of free trade and a growing appetite for economic nationalism. For some, Caterpillar's exit is a betrayal of American values. For others, it's simply the unavoidable consequence of an interconnected global economy. On social media, the debate turns even more personal and more polarized. Laid-off workers share heartbreaking stories of foreclosure threats and canceled health insurance, while others vent their anger at politicians, corporate boards, or even their own union reps. Some direct their rage at the administration, believing its tariff policies and weak enforcement drove the company away. Others blame Caterpillar itself, saying that no amount of tax relief or trade protection would have stopped leadership from chasing cheaper labor and looser regulations abroad. Amid the growing chaos, labor unions are forced to rethink everything. For generations, their strength came from the shop floor, from the ability to shut down production lines and bring negotiations to a halt. But now, with the factory silent and jobs offshore, that power vanishes. Can you strike against a ghost? One union president asks during a live stream. It's not rhetorical. Organizers quickly begin pivoting. Digital pickets, coordinated boycotts, and shareholder meeting disruptions become their new tools. They hack the very corporate structures that once ignored them, organizing activist investor campaigns to flood boardrooms with uncomfortable questions. It's uncharted territory, a labor movement reinventing itself not on assembly lines, but in cyberspace and stockholder Zoom calls. Yet, even as the tactics evolve, the stakes remain the same. For the families left behind, this fight isn't about policy nuance or trade theory. It's about survival. And for a country reckoning with what it means to lose a pillar of its industrial identity, the Caterpillar exodus marks more than just a business decision. It's a turning point. A question hangs in the air, unspoken but heavy. If even the most iconic American companies can leave, who and what is left to believe in?